Hello. I am a ninja. So you get it. I catched it.
Welcome to another episode of Miss Erica's Crazy Costume Catastrophe. This week, Miss Erica is dressed like a ninja. Yeah! The first thing that we're going to look at this week is our big Bible timeline. Remember, Jesus is in the period of his life where he's doing ministry and miracles and teaching all around Galilee, Judea, Samaria, and he's building a following of people who are learning about what it means to live in Jesus' new kingdom. The next thing I want us to look at is, where is Jesus? So this week we're going to be in Matthew 5 through 7. Remember, Matthew was a tax collector, but then he decided to leave his old life of stealing and disobeying God and following Jesus, and he becomes one of Jesus's followers, one of the disciples. And then he later, after Jesus rises from the dead and goes up into the sky, Matthew writes down all these stories of what Jesus did when he was walking around. And so that's what the book of Matthew is, which we'll be looking at today. So Jesus is in Galilee. And Matthew 4 actually tells us that there were all these people from Galilee, from Jerusalem, Judea, the Decapolis, and even beyond the Jordan, who were following Jesus and had come to hear him teach. So the story that we're going to look at today, Jesus sees all these people, all these crowds from all over, and he sits down on a hill and he decides to teach them. Jesus sits down on the hill and he teaches all these people. A lot of times people call this teaching that we're going to look at today the Sermon on the Mountain. When you guys watch Pastor Steve or Pastor Carl on Sundays, they do a sermon. A sermon is just teaching from God's word. And so that's what Jesus does when he's sitting on this hillside to all the people. And that's what we're going to look at together. Most of the people listening to Jesus this day would have been slaves or very poor peasants who lived around the region, and they've just come to listen to Jesus. They've maybe seen him do miracles or teach somewhere else, and now they've followed him out into the countryside to listen to him and hear what he has to say. I wanted to talk to you guys real quick about what the people back then, including Jesus, would have read. So they didn't have a Bible like this that they could buy at Target. They had scrolls, and they looked like this. I want to show you a picture of them from this book called The World That Jesus Knew. This is a really cool book for you history nerds. I know Evan Kahn has it. It's really cool, and I like to read it a lot. And so this is a picture of the scrolls that the people back then would have read, and that's where they would have read three things that they had in their Bible. And so they had the law, the prophets, and the writings. And all of that is what we call the Old Testament. But they just usually called it the law and the prophets. It was like a shorter way of talking about their writing, their words from God that they thought was really important and that they read all the time. And Jesus read the law and the prophets all the time, as well as all the people there. They would have heard it in the synagogue or at the temple, and they would have grown up hearing all of the law and the prophets and the writings. We're going to be looking at Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Oaks, I want to challenge you to sit down sometime this week and read these 3 chapters. Read the whole sermon. You guys are totally old enough to read it, and just let God's word speak to you. It's really cool. I've been playing it on an app on my phone all week, and it's just been fun to hear Jesus preach a sermon and listen to his words to me. All of this sermon is about your heart. I want to let that sink in. It's about your heart. Jesus kept saying, "You have heard it said," and then he would say a law or a rule that the Pharisees had made up, or sometimes he would even say a law from the Old Testament, from the law. But then he would say, "But I say," and he would deal with the heart. So a great example of this is he says, "You have heard it said, don't murder." Yeah, that's a good rule, right? Don't kill people. But then Jesus says, but I say that even if you hate somebody in your heart, that's just as bad as killing them. And so Jesus invites people into another level of holiness. Jesus doesn't want a bunch of rule followers. He wants to give people new hearts. He wants to restore their relationships with God. Fun fact, Jesus knew the law and the prophets really, really well. Remember, we've learned how Jesus was a big Bible nerd? Jesus knew that the end of the law and the end of the prophets were both about the same thing. They were both about waiting, but not just waiting to go to Chuck E. Cheese. They were about waiting for a perfect ruler, a perfect king who would be a good prophet and who would perfectly obey every one of God's laws and who would restore everybody's relationship with God. And so everybody has been waiting. All of the people who had grown up reading the law and the prophets, like Jesus, had been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they would have heard those words about we're waiting for this new ruler to come and restore us to God. And they just kept waiting. So remember, Jesus kept saying, you have heard these laws, but I say. And then he says this. He says, do not think that I have come to throw away or get rid of the law and the prophets. I have not come to throw them away, but to fulfill them. That word fulfill is really cool because it doesn't just mean to like check a little box off your to-do list. It means to completely, perfectly fill up something that was missing, that you were waiting for. And not just fill it up a little bit, but to fill it all the way up to the top, to overflowing. So I want to show you guys what that looks like. And that this is the law and the prophets. So a ton of prophecies and words and waiting and hoping for a perfect king who would come someday and restore our relationship with God. And so the people had been reading and reading and waiting for hundreds and hundreds of years for someone to come and fulfill what they had been waiting for, to complete all that was missing that they were waiting for. And so when Jesus came on the scene, he says, I didn't come to throw away this or to get rid of this. I came to fulfill the law and the prophets. And he didn't just fulfill it by adding a little more. Jesus came to fulfill it by filling it up all the way, even to overflowing. Jesus filled up all of the things that the people had been waiting for in the law and the prophets for hundreds and hundreds of years. And Jesus is everything that we have been waiting for too. Making Jesus your king isn't about following the rules. I want you to hear that. Kids, moms, dads, making Jesus your king isn't about following the rules. Making Jesus your king is about realizing that Jesus is the king you have been waiting for, and he's the only one who can restore your relationship with God. Jesus is the king that you have been waiting for. He didn't come to give you more rules. He didn't come to tell you things you have to do to be a good boy or a good girl. Jesus came to restore your relationship with God. He is the king you have been waiting for. When Jesus died on the cross, he got rid of sin so that you and God could be reunited. That's the kind of king that Jesus is. This week, I want to invite you to just spend some time with Jesus. Talk to him about why he's a good king, why you love him, and why he's the king that you've been waiting for. All right, guys, it's been so fun hanging out with you. Thanks for watching another episode of Miss Erica's Crazy Costume Catastrophe. Bye.